Stratacut demonstration, number 1. I'm going to demonstrate a little eye log here, which I'm in the process of building. It's for a little shot, or for a longer piece called eye candy. This eye is moving diagonally. If I cut this up with a knife, 1 frame at a time, at 1/8 of an inch each time, the eye you see will be starting to move into the block. This is a photo cutout example of the size of that eye. I'm going to be actually animating this photo cutout and cutting it away as I cut the Stratacut, so it seems to merge seamlessly from the photo eye into the Stratacut, same shape of the Stratacut eye. By here, the photo would be gone, for example. By here, it's half there. It would merge with this that eye. This is the exploded view, the interior section of what's going on inside this eye. There's some eye blinks. Well, first of all, there's the iris, the pupil, the iris. The whites of the eyes have been added after this has all been built. Then I've dug these little gouges, these little cavities or valleys, which are eye blinks. And they're about 1/4 of an inch, 1/3 of an inch at the top, and then they go down to nothing, like little wedges. Just cut them out, and then add eyeliner, which is this, or eyelashes I should say, which is striped material, striped clay, that's put through an extruder in order to get these thin, long lines. And sliced up and then laid over on that, like that, on a diagonal. And the reason for the diagonal is to get animation. Every time I cut this frame, these eyelashes are going to be moving across the frame, approximately, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch each frame, and they'll have this really fluid, continuous motion then. This is the, again, the eyeliner, and this is the eyelid filled in. This is the regular flesh around the eye, and I've gone ahead and cut open this to show you how it becomes an eye, or goes from an eye to being a blink, and how that blink starts to open a slice at a time. Cut. I was going to show you how the fun thing I'm trying out right now is I want to eventually animate with a pasta extruder. If we get a really fine micro-incremented pasta extruder, how I can take a slice of that eye, put it through the grinder, and come up with a skinnier eye that's warped and distorted. And if I put it through, I change the setting and I put it through again, it gets even skinnier. You cut it up, you change the setting and put it through again, and it gets even skinnier. And what I want to do eventually is take that principle and animate it much like a Xerox smear. So there'd be stretch and squash. Not only would you have every slice going frame at a time, you'd have replacement stretch and squash of the animation going on, so they'd be going upwards and sideways and every which way. To build one of these blocks, the first thing I'll do is usually a simple technique called the pigs in a blanket, which is taking a bun, which in this case is the color black, taking a little rope of white, which will be the dog, and wrapping the bun around the dog to make the highlight in the pupil, which is then itself rolled like that, and this is what is placed inside the center of the eye with clay texture wrapped around it. Now that texture is an extruded sandwich of different colors like this, which have been run through the phosphor grinder to be even and whatnot. I further extrude it or make it skinnier, but just by putting pressure on it, so the slices get thinner and thinner and thinner. And an interesting thing about StrataCut is that if you put something at a diagonal, a sharp diagonal like this, and cut your knife that way, the fact that the lines are still thick, even though if you look at them that way, the lines are very skinny. This principle is important, for example, in this eye, this 45-degree angle movement of this eye coming into this block from nowhere, because the pupil that I made inside this eye is a skinnier oval shape in order to make it seem like it's a circle. If I had left this pupil material this thickness and put it at a diagonal like that, I would have gotten a very, very warped and distorted pupil. So in order to avoid that problem, anytime something is moving from side to side in a StrataCut block, you know I've had to make it really, really skinny in order to seem normal when it's cut open again. So that is why this part of the pupil is much, much skinnier. The speed, again taking this simple line of striped material, the speed with which something moves across frame is directly proportional to what angle you position it to the camera lens, or to the slice. Here you get a very fast line moving across frame, zip, slice, 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 slice. So in like 8 slices, this striped line was going whoop. If you move this at a 45-degree angle though, you probably have 2 seconds of animation, much slower, much less fast, one at a time, each slice taking, and also of course the lines would be skinnier. And if you move it directly toward the frame, you get no animation at all. Anyway, with this material and this pig's in a blanket, back to the subject, I layer up this stripe material, and I'm going to rotate it around the center of the pupil, and this will create the iris, and this iris will be a very fast series of lines which are whipping around like a clock, like hands on the watch of a clock or something. They're going zzz. If I was doing this more carefully, they should all be concentric, meaning all those lines should go to the middle of the pupil directly. Right now I've done this in kind of a lazy, crude kind of fashion, so you're going to see all sorts of warbling. See how lines don't actually, they kind of like wrap around and they do other kinds of shapes, which can be really cool, but the important thing about the iris material is it should be like a sunburst coming from the center of the pupil. And if I were to do this accurately, it's based on this principle basically, what's going on in here, but I would spend a lot more time trying to line them up, because whenever they bulge, you can see how this is bulging this direction and that's bulging that direction. You're going to get all sorts of inconsistent lines that are just warbling all over the place, which again looks nice, but for this particular application isn't really the way to go about it. Okay, well, that pretty much explains the eye. Another idea in StrataCut is rotating objects. This is a box rotating in space. This is the top of the lid of the box up here, and these are the 2 sides, the yellow side, the red side. You can see how one side is moving across frame. If I'm cutting this up this direction, basically toward the camera this way, but cutting it up like that, you can see on the underbelly of this object how one side is moving across and elegantly becoming very skinny right there and disappearing, while this yellow, this little yellow side is like very, very skinny starting out here, and as it gets larger and larger, it gets thicker and thicker as it moves across frame. Also, its shape is shifting. The resulting animation of this kind of like snaky-like looking object is basically a 2D or a 2-point perspective box with a cube, would you say, moving from one side to the other. You can see how this side has moved that direction, and the top of the lid of the box has started to change its parallelogram, its shape. How it's starting to further that process. You can see how this is starting to become a parallelogram. It's moving up that way. It's starting to get a more slanted angle to it, whereas this line right here is much shorter and much more a steep angle. And we're getting, by this slice, we're getting awfully close to that side of that box fully disappearing. But if you keep going, as you can see through the contour of this programmed piece of motion sculpture, you'll get the yellow coming around on the other side. So it's starting to interframe as if the other side of the box, the cube, if you will, is coming around forward. So in brief, that's an example of rotational objects in StrataCut. What I'm working with shape is shape distortion. Animation in clay is shape distortion. So a cone is a very simple shape, but when you cut it up from the front to the back, you're getting a dot, a very small dot that becomes larger and larger and animates to becoming a very large circle at the back side of it. That is the essence of shape distortion in StrataCut. So animation is built upon that principle. Anytime you shift the volume of a size of a shape, it's animating and doing some kind of shape change. If I were to move this thing from right off center to sideways, what you get is a big oval shape that's also increasing in size, and is moving across frame. It's actually changing from this position to way over here very quickly. So it's increasing in size, it's distorted, distended, and begins its animation movement and happens much quicker. Another thing I wanted to show, as long as I've got the tape rolling, is the idea of how you make a cube checker pattern. You take these lines and cut them up and stack them. You can cut equidistant quarter-inch sections, and then I'm going to flip-flop them. Every other section is going to be flip-flopped and stacked back together. This is a way of getting a checkerboard pattern very quickly. So that's flipped. This is put in, stacked again straight. This is flipped. That's stacked in straight. I'm going to go ahead and make it even and do one more. And this will be flipped. It gives you not a complete checkerboard, but it gives you an idea of how you make pattern stuff in this material quickly. And if I were to animate this, what I would probably do is, let's say I want to animate little cube sections. I'm going to repeat the same process, only going perpendicular to the last sets of cuts. And I'm going to flip-flop every one of these as well. I'm going to flip one up and flip the other down. So this stays upright, this gets flipped, this stays upright, and this gets flipped, this stays upright, this gets flipped, so on and so forth. Now if I wanted to make animation out of this, my likeliest approach would be to put it on a diagonal like this and cut it up this way. Slice, 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 slice. Or even more interesting sometimes is to put it in a cube fashion like that. Basically put some supporting clay around it, but get it to on a real canted angle to the way a cubed prismatic or a diamond cut angle to the way the lens would be shooting the image and the way the knife would be cutting it. So in order to get this, sometimes you can do some really interesting things, like in order to get this ultimate result, I can make a cube out of this itself. It takes some thought, but it's worth watching. If I take that shape, you can see the interesting patterns that you'd get when you when you go on a diagonal like that. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Take that shape, and what I did was I cut it this way, and I'm gonna stagger it back to that end. I'm gonna cut it at a more 45-degree angle because it'll be simpler for me to do it. We do that. Make this like that. And you see how this shape that I just cut off from over here, if you put it on the other side there, it lines up perfectly. It becomes the continuating pattern on the other side. If I take an equal amount of cut, you can see how I'm making a shape that lines up. Sorry, I shouldn't move that upstairs. A shape that lines up this way now. And now I'm going to do something crazy and cut it this direction. And you see how these two parts, like there, just line up together? And so I made another parallelogram just by I'm marrying the negative side of the part I cut with the positive side of the other part of the block. And now, if I cut finally this side off and marry it on this side, you can see how these two line up. And what I've got again now is a box, or a fairly rough, but the idea is true. You've got a box shape again, and this is an ideal form to cut stratacut up in, but it's a series of diagonal shapes that are prismatically moving across frame. They're like flittering in and flittering out. There's a moment of animation, they're moving across the screen, and then they disappear to be taken up by the next color, the next diagonal shape. Anyway, what I tried to briefly show there is with about 4 or 5 geometric cuts, you can take basically a box of pattern material like this, cut it at certain types of cantilevered angles, put the opposite or the negative side on the reverse part of the block, and then keep doing that about 3 or 4 times, and you end up with a block again, is what I'm trying to point out. Anyway, it's run the tape back and review that, because I know it looks kind of weird, but it really is a very clever and effective way to get textured material that animates very quickly. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Take that shape, and what I did was I cut it this way, and I'm gonna stagger it back to that end. I'm going to cut it at a more 45-degree angle because it'll be simpler for me to do it. We do that. Make this like that. And you see how this shape that I just cut off from over here, if you put it on the other side there, it lines up perfectly. It becomes the continuating pattern on the other side. If I take an equal amount of cut, you can see how I'm making a shape that lines up. Sorry, I shouldn't move that upstairs. A shape that lines up this way now. And now I'm going to do something crazy and cut it this direction. And you see how these two parts, like there, just line up together? And so I made another parallelogram just by I'm marrying the negative side of the part I cut with the positive side of the other part of the block. And now, if I cut finally this side off and marry it on this side, you can see how these two line up. And what I've got again now is a box, or a fairly rough, but the idea is true. You've got a box shape again. And this is an ideal form to cut stratacut up in, but it's a series of diagonal shapes that are prismatically moving across frame. They're like flittering in and flittering out. There's a moment of animation, they're moving across the screen, and then they disappear to be taken up by the next color, the next diagonal shape. Anyway, what I tried to briefly show there is with about 4 or 5 geometric cuts, you can take basically a box of pattern material like this, cut it at certain types of cantilevered angles, put the opposite or the negative side on the reverse part of the block, and then keep doing that about 3 or 4 times, and you end up with a block again, is what I'm trying to point out. Anyway, it's run the tape back and review that, because I know it looks kind of weird, but it really is a very clever and effective way to get textured material that animates very quickly.